What happens when a mundane life collides with a deadly secret mission? Brace yourself for a journey of mystery, danger, and betrayal where nothing is as it seems. Mr. Samuel Roberts, a 48-year-old city clerk, had spent the better part of his life shuffling through paperwork and monotonous routines. Each morning he awoke to the same dreary, sightless, cluttered desk, the ticking of the old office clock, the unremarkable hum of city life just outside his window. The spark of adventure, the sense of purpose that once thrilled him, had long since been replaced by an aching emptiness. His life felt as though it were stuck in an endless loop, the same predictable rhythm of work, home, sleep, and repeat. He longed for something more, for a taste of danger, glory, something that would shatter the banality of his existence. It was on one particularly uneventful Tuesday, while nursing a cup of tepid coffee in the corner of the office, that Mr. Roberts first encountered Parker Pyne. Pyne was an enigmatic figure, well-dressed, with a quiet intensity that seemed to simmer beneath his composed exterior. He entered the office with an air of purpose, as though he had a mission, and immediately caught Mr. Roberts' attention. Over the next few days, the two crossed paths more than one seat first. It seemed like mere coincidence. But Roberts quickly realized that Pyne wasn't the type to leave things to chance. There was something in his gaze, a knowing look that suggested he saw straight through the mundane facade of Roberts' life. It wasn't until that fateful evening when Pyne invited Roberts to dinner, promising an evening of discussions that could alter the course of his life, that the real intrigue began. The setting was an elegant, dimly lit restaurant, far removed from the ordinary world Roberts inhabited. As they sipped wine, Pyne's words were carefully measured, each one designed to both soothe and excite. "You've been waiting for something, haven't you?" Pyne's voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. A moment, a chance, to do something extraordinary. To break free from the chains of this dull, predictable existence. "I can offer you that. But it's not without its risks. Not everyone comes out unscathed." Mr. Roberts sat there, caught between skepticism and the promise of something more. Could he, the humble city clerk, really embark on such a wild adventure? Would he dare risk everything for something as fleeting as a moment of glory? As if sensing Roberts' hesitation, Pyne leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Roberts with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly colder. "I am offering you a chance, Roberts. A chance that could change everything. But," he added with a cryptic smile, "be warned, your life will never be the same after tomorrow." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Roberts could feel his pulse quicken, a rush of excitement mingled with a hint of fear. Was this the opportunity he'd been waiting for? Or was it a trap, carefully laid by a man with too many secrets? As Pyne's laughter rang softly in his ears, Roberts knew that, whatever lay ahead, his life had already begun its transformation. What do you think Roberts will do next? Call to adventure. The secret mission. The next evening, Roberts found himself in the same upscale restaurant. But this time the air was charged with something far more intense. Pyne's calm demeanor had been replaced by an unmistakable tension, as though he were about to reveal a secret too dangerous for ordinary ears. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the table, and as Roberts sat down, he could see that Pyne wasn't alone. Across from him sat a man whose presence seemed to fill the room with an unspoken authority. Mr. Bonington, tall, with a sharp gaze and the kind of voice that commanded attention, was the last person Roberts expected to meet. As they exchanged pleasantries, Roberts couldn't help but notice the undercurrent of urgency in their conversation. Pyne's voice remained cool, but there was an edge to it, something clipped, as if they were speaking in code. Mr. Bonington's responses were curt, his words carefully measured. Roberts, ever the outsider, listened intently, trying to follow the fragments of conversation that floated over his head. "The plans are critical, Bonington. We can't afford any more mistakes. The double agent'll be in Geneva tomorrow. We can't allow him to get his hands on those documents." Pyne's words came like sharp whispers, each one loaded with unspoken meaning. Robert's pulse quickened. Double agent, secret plans, The vague references to a murder that wasn't in the newspapers were enough to make his heart race. His world, until now so predictable and dull, suddenly felt like it was shifting beneath his feet. He wanted to speak up, to ask questions, but the words stuck in his throat. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he could sense the gravity of the situation. Is Roberts aware of the risks? Bonington's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He wasn't looking at Roberts, but his question was directed at him. No, Pyne replied, his voice low and steady. But he will be soon enough. Robert's mind reeled. What on earth were they talking about, and why was he the one in the room with them? He had no business being part of whatever was unfolding, yet Pyne's calm certainty made him feel like he was already too far gone to back out. A knot of anxiety formed in the pit of his stomach. The world he knew, papers, ledgers, the dull hum of office life suddenly felt miles away, and the pull of whatever Pyne was about to involve him in seemed like a powerful magnet. Roberts, Pyne said, his voice now steely with resolve. You are the one I've chosen for this mission. You may not understand why, but it's not about experience. It's about who you are, and who you will become. The weight of the words hit Roberts like a punch to the gut. He blinked, trying to process what was happening. This was absurd. He was just a city clerk. What did he know about covert operations, murders, or double agents? But Pyne's gaze never wavered, his certainty unshakable. Before Roberts could formulate a response, Pyne slid an envelope across the table, sealing his fate without another word. It was heavy, the paper thick with the promise of something far more significant than a mere piece of correspondence. The label on the front was simple, "For your eyes only." It felt like a weighty symbol, a threshold to a world that Roberts had no idea was waiting for him. As Roberts took the envelope, a strange thrill bubbled up inside him, mingled with a sense of dread. Pyne's eyes gleamed as if the moment had already been decided. Tomorrow, Pyne said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, you'll board the first-class sleeper train to Geneva. Everything you need to know is in there. But remember, if you don't follow through, here is no turning back. Roberts nodded mechanically, unsure of whether to feel exhilarated or terrified. The quiet clink of silverware and the hum of voices around them felt distant now. His heart hammered in his chest, and as he stood to leave, he could barely contain the surge of adrenaline that coursed through his veins. Pyne's final words echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain. Tomorrow, your life will never be the same. The next morning, Roberts found himself at the train station, the envelope still tightly clutched in his hand. He felt the eyes of the city watching him, as though the walls themselves knew that something was about to change. The train to Geneva loomed ahead, a sleek, elegant beast of metal and glass that promised both escape and danger in equal measure. Roberts stepped aboard, each movement slow, deliberate, as if he were stepping into a new world altogether. As the train began to move, he glanced down at the envelope once more, wondering just how deep into the rabbit hole he had fallen. The doors to his compartment closed behind him with a finality that sent a chill down his spine. As the train rattled along the tracks, he opened the envelope, scanning the contents with growing unease. But it was what wasn't written there that unsettled him most, the sense that something, or someone, was waiting for him just beyond the horizon. He wasn't just carrying an envelope anymore. He was carrying the fate of a secret that could unravel everything. Unaware of the true danger ahead, Roberts felt a new sense of resolve settle in his chest. He was already too far in to back out. And somehow, he knew there was no turning back. Cliffhanger. The next morning, Roberts found himself at the train station, the envelope still tightly clutched in his hand. He felt the eyes of the city watching him, as though the walls themselves knew that something was about to change. The train to Geneva loomed ahead, a sleek, elegant beast of metal and glass that promised both escape and danger in equal measure. Roberts stepped aboard, each movement slow, deliberate, as if he were stepping into a new world altogether. As the train began to move, he glanced down at the envelope once more, wondering just how deep into the rabbit hole he had fallen. But before he could open it, a shadow passed by his compartment window. Someone was standing outside, watching him. His breath caught in his throat. Was it just his imagination, or had Pyne's warning already begun to play out? The doors to his compartment clicked shut, the sound echoing in the silence. Roberts hesitated, the envelope still unopened. There was no turning back now. But the question burned in his mind. What exactly had he just stepped into? Rising tension, layers of danger unfold. The train rattled through the darkened countryside, its rhythmic hum a constant companion as Roberts sat, alone in his compartment. The envelope still felt heavy in his hands, an invisible weight pressing down on him. He had read the contents briefly before, but the words cloaked in vagueness and urgency had done little to quell the growing unease swirling in his chest. Pyne's words echoed in his mind. Your life will never be the same. As the train rolled into Geneva's quiet station in the early hours of the morning, Roberts could feel the tension in the air. The streets were eerily empty, the only sounds coming from the soft tap of his shoes against the cobblestone road as he made his way toward the hotel Pyne had instructed him to find. His senses were on high alert, every flicker of movement or distant voice sending a jolt of anxiety through him. Was he being followed? Had he been seen? The hotel was an old, faded place, a relic of another time, but it was just the sort of place Pyne would choose. The receptionist, a stiff woman with narrow eyes, barely glanced up as he checked in. His room, number 12, was small, overlooking an alley that seemed more suited for shadows than sunlight. Roberts closed the door behind him, his heart racing as he set down the envelope and glanced around. Minutes later, there was a sharp knock at the door. Roberts froze, his pulse quickening. Who could it be? No one knew he was here yet, except for Pyne. And Pyne had been clear that he wasn't supposed to meet anyone until after dark. With caution, Roberts opened the door just a crack. A tall, bearded man in a dark suit stood in the hallway, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat. His eyes gleamed from behind the scruff of his beard, as if seeing straight through Roberts. "You must be Roberts," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, with a hint of something foreign in his accent. Before Roberts could respond, the man stepped inside, his presence overwhelming the small space. He was carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. "The time has come," the man muttered cryptically, before setting the briefcase down on the table. "You've been chosen for a reason, Roberts. You don't know it yet, but you are about to enter a world much darker than you can imagine." Roberts swallowed, unsure of what to say, but his instinct screamed at him to trust nothing, not this man, not the situation, not even himself. Yet, in the very pit of his stomach, he knew that he had crossed a line, and there was no way to go back. The bearded man opened the case, revealing a revolver gleaming and deadly. Roberts stiffened. "You'll need this," the man continued, his gaze never leaving Roberts. "Things are going to get complicated. There are many who would love to see you fail, but there are others who want something far worse. You'll find them, and they'll find you." Roberts took a step back, his mind racing. "What exactly am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, even as the revolver felt impossibly heavy in his hands. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded map, its edges frayed with age. With slow deliberation, he unfurled it, revealing a series of intricate symbols and cryptic markings that made no sense to Roberts. "This is the map of the Romanov jewels well, what's left of them. Lost for decades, hidden in plain sight, the secrets scattered across Europe. But here is one catch," the man said, his voice taking on an ominous edge. "The person who holds the map also holds the key to a power beyond their understanding, and those who come for it won't stop at anything to take it." The map was like nothing Roberts had ever seen, a symbol of wealth and mystery, bound to a history that he had no right to touch. But Pyne had chosen him. Pyne had said he would be a part of something grand, something that would change him forever. Was this it? Just as Roberts processed the weight of what he had been thrust into, The bearded man leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The others are already watching. Don't trust anyone, especially not the woman you'll meet soon. She's part of the game, and she'll try to deceive you. Remember this, trust no one, not even Pyne." With those final, chilling words, the man stepped back and grabbed the briefcase, snapping it shut with a finality that sent a chill down Robert's spine. "You have until midnight," the man said, pausing at the door. "Get to the rendezvous. The clock is already ticking." Before Roberts could react, the man vanished into the dimly lit hallway, leaving Roberts standing in his room, reeling from the sudden turn his life had taken. His fingers still gripped the revolver tightly, but his mind was spinning with questions. Cliffhanger. As the man disappeared, Roberts' gaze fell to the map again. The cryptic markings, the jewels, none of it made sense, yet it was becoming clear that he was now entangled in something far larger than he could have ever imagined. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. Robert's heart skipped a beat. Was it the man, or someone else? He cautiously approached the door, hesitating before slowly opening it only to find the hallway empty. But lying at his feet was a small, folded note, hastily scrawled with one chilling line. "They know you are here. Trust no one." Robert's breath hitched as he looked down the empty corridor. The game had begun, and he was already a pawn in a much larger plot. The foreign beauty. As the train to Paris sliced through the French countryside, Roberts could barely keep his thoughts in order. The weight of the revolver, the cryptic map, and the strange warning from the bearded man felt suffocating. He stared out the window, watching the rolling hills blur past, trying to grasp the reality of the situation he had found himself in. It seemed absurd, too impossible to be real, but every moment confirmed it wasn't a dream. It was when the train entered a long, dark tunnel that Roberts first noticed her. She stepped into the compartment with the silent grace of a woman accustomed to moving unnoticed. Her entrance was subtle, like a whisper in the dark, but once she stepped into the light, it was impossible to ignore her. She was stunning, tall, elegant, and draped in an aura of old-world glamour. Her dark hair framed her face in soft waves, and her wide, almond-shaped eyes, full of suspicion and fear, darted nervously from side to side. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was arresting. "I am sorry," she said suddenly, her voice breathless, as if she had just run a great distance. "Is this seat taken?" Roberts barely managed to shake himself from his stupor and nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "No, please, Before he could finish, she slumped into the seat opposite him, her gaze scanning the compartment with the vigilance of a cornered animal. Roberts felt an instinctive shiver crawl down his spine. Something about her jittery energy, the way she couldn't seem to stay still, told him she was running from something. Someone. "Thank you," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She then leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his, her expression unreadable. "Here is no time. They'll find me soon." Roberts frowned. "Who's looking for you?" Her lips pressed into a tight line. She glanced quickly out of the window, and when she spoke again, it was in a voice thick with fear. "A Russian agent. He's been following me for days. He won't stop until he finds me." Robert's heart rate quickened, his earlier confusion now replaced by the sharp sting of adrenaline. This wasn't just a random encounter. No, this woman was caught in something much bigger than he could understand. "What do you want from me?" he asked, unable to disguise the edge of suspicion creeping into his voice. The woman's gaze softened for a moment, her fear momentarily giving way to a flash of vulnerability. "I am not sure you have a choice," she replied, her voice steadying slightly. "But you are the only one I can trust." Before Roberts could ask another question, the compartment door slid open with a creak. The woman froze, her eyes wide with terror. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the unmistakable coldness of a trained agent. His expression was neutral, his eyes scanning the room as if he already knew exactly what he was looking for. Robert's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not like this. The man's eyes flicked to Roberts, then back to the woman, and in that brief moment of tension, the woman moved faster than Roberts could process. She reached into her bag, pulled something small and rolled tightly in silk, and shoved it into his hands. "Protect this with your life," she whispered, her voice trembling. Roberts instinctively took the bundle, his fingers brushing against her soft skin for just a second before she vanished, slipping out of the compartment before the man could even react. He was left standing there in stunned silence, the weight of the bundle pressing into his palms. His heart was pounding, and for a moment, he couldn't even bring himself to look at it. But then, curiosity mingled with a growing sense of danger pushed him to unroll the delicate fabric. Inside, there was nothing but a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was light, almost weightless, and yet it felt as though it held the weight of 1,000 secrets. As he stared at it, trying to comprehend what had just transpired, the door slammed open, and the Russian agent stepped into the room, his eyes locking on Roberts with deadly intent. "Where is she?" the man demanded, his accent thick, his hand reaching for the holster at his side. Robert's blood ran cold. His mind screamed for him to move, to do something, but his body refused to obey. The agent's gaze shifted to the bundle in Robert's hand, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Had he already given it to her? The agent took a step closer, but Roberts still hadn't moved. His hand wrapped around the revolver, the weight of the gun suddenly feeling too real. "Cliffhanger." "Who are you?" Roberts asked, his voice hoarse, his grip on the small box tightening. The Russian agent smiled cold and knowing. "You are in far too deep, Mr. Roberts," he sneered. "But don't worry. I'll make sure you never see her again." Just as the man reached out, Roberts acted. With a sharp breath, he shoved the box into his jacket pocket and stood, his hand gripping the revolver, ready for whatever came next. Before he could pull the trigger, the agent lunged, and Roberts was plunged into a game of survival that had only just begun. The night of peril. Action and deception. The train rocked gently as it glided through the French countryside, but for Roberts, it felt like the world itself was shifting beneath him. His fingers trembled around the revolver, the small box still hidden deep in his coat pocket. The moment the woman had vanished, disappearing as silently as she had appeared, was the moment everything spiraled into chaos. The air in the compartment now felt thick with unease. It wasn't just the rush of adrenaline or the scent of the revolver. Something was wrong. And then he heard it. A muffled scuffle. The sound of something being violently pushed, a chair scraping against the floor, the unmistakable thud of a body falling. Roberts whipped around, his heart in his throat, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. But there was nothing, no sign of the woman, no sign of struggle, nothing except the sudden, overpowering smell that hit him like a wall. Chloroform. He barely had time to react before a wave of dizziness swept over him. His vision blurred, the edges of his consciousness blurring as if everything was happening underwater. He fought it, clawing at his senses, refusing to collapse into the fog of unconsciousness. His hands reached for his face, and in a desperate frenzy, he held his breath, trying to stay awake. But it was too late. With a gasp, Roberts staggered forward, the room spinning wildly. He reached the door of the compartment, barely able to steady himself. When he yanked it open, the scene that greeted him nearly made his stomach churn. The woman gone, the compartment empty, the faint trace of chloroform lingered in the air, thickening the tension, and in that moment, Roberts realized what was happening. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was orchestrated. The Russian agent, the mysterious figures on the train, all of it was part of something much bigger. There was no time to lose. Roberts stumbled down the narrow train corridor, the pounding of his heart drowned out by the chaotic rattle of the train's wheels. He had to find her. He had to rescue her. His only lead, the small bundle she had left behind now, felt like his only lifeline. Suddenly, his instincts kicked in. He saw him. The Russian agent, the one who had been tailing him earlier, stepped out of a nearby cabin. Roberts froze, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had to act fast. He couldn't let this man see him. Not now. A plan began to form in Robert's mind. He had no choice but to take a risk. It was reckless, but there was no alternative. In an instant, Roberts ripped the conductor's hat off a passing train employee and shoved it on his head, adjusting his posture to mimic the stiff, authoritative stride of a rail conductor. His heart thudded against his ribs, but he kept his face neutral, his expression guarded. He couldn't let his nerves show. Not now. He made his way to the next compartment, where the Russian agent had disappeared into a moment earlier. The door slid open with an audible click, and Roberts stepped inside, breathing shallowly, maintaining the facade of a composed conductor. To his surprise, the cabin was dark, and for a moment he thought he had made a mistake. But another, tied to a chair in the far corner, was the woman. Her eyes fluttered, barely open, but when she saw Roberts, a flicker of recognition crossed her face, a silent plea for help. She was bound tightly, but alive. Roberts wasted no time. The door clicked shut behind him as he moved swiftly to her side, his hands working with frantic precision to untie the ropes. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that it nearly drowned out the sound of her soft, labored breaths. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently, glancing around the room, making sure no one was watching. But just as the final knot unraveled, the door exploded open with a force that sent Roberts flying backward. The Russian agent, furious and relentless, stepped into the room, his eyes blazing with menace. The man's hand was already reaching for his weapon, his cold expression telling Roberts everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a chase anymore. This was a fight to the death. The woman gasped, her eyes wide with terror. As Roberts scrambled to his feet, there was no time to think. He had to protect her. He had to get them out of here. But as Roberts moved to shield her, a loud bang echoed through the train, an unmistakable sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Cliffhanger. The Russian agent raised his gun, aiming directly at Roberts. The woman screamed, but before the shot could be fired, the cabin door slammed shut. The unmistakable sound of pounding fists against wood filled the air. "We're trapped," Roberts hissed, his voice tight with panic as he quickly scanned the room for an escape. A single, desperate thought raced through his mind. He had one chance, one final chance to escape. And then the door splintered under the force of the blows, and Roberts knew the moment of truth was upon them. With the agent outside, pounding against the locked door, Roberts could only pray that the daring escape he'd been planning would be enough to save them both. Chase across Paris. A game of cat and mouse. Paris, the city of light, had turned into a labyrinth of shadows, its charming streets now a maze of danger and deceit. Roberts and the woman dashed through the narrow alleys, their breath ragged in the chill night air, their footsteps echoing in the silence that surrounded them. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, seemed to conceal yet another danger lurking in the darkness. The winding streets of Paris had become a trap, a deadly game in which they were both the hunted and the hunters. The woman now revealed as Olga, though Roberts was still unsure of her true identity, was ahead, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. Roberts pushed himself harder, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to keep up. He couldn't lose her. With every passing second, their pursuers were closing in. "Faster," Olga urged, glancing over her shoulder. Her face was pale, the fear in her eyes unmistakable. But she didn't stop running, even as a black car with tinted windows rolled slowly by, its occupants scanning the street. Roberts barely had time to react before they were forced to duck into another alley, the oppressive weight of the night closing in on them. The shadows seemed to move, following them, as if the city itself were conspiring against them. But the worst part, the unshakable feeling that they were being watched not just by the men in the car, but by something or someone else, someone who knew the game better than they did. Their flight took them deeper into the heart of Paris, away from the famous landmarks, and into the forgotten corners where the city's dark underbelly came to life. And it was in those alleys that Roberts started to feel the true weight of their predicament. Trust had become a fragile thing. The woman had revealed little about herself, and Roberts knew nothing of her past, but there were glimpses of something deeper, something haunting. She was more than she appeared, and Roberts couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, something that could make or break them. As they reached an old courtyard, the woman finally slowed, her eyes darting nervously around. She grabbed Roberts by the arm and pulled him into a secluded corner. The tension between them was thick, as if they both knew their lives depended on the next few words. "I never wanted to drag you into this," Olga said, her voice trembling, but she stood tall, facing him with newfound resolve. "But you must understand, this isn't just about a jewel or a conspiracy. It's about blood, my blood, my blood." Roberts blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath and glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one was following. "I am the last of the Romanov bloodline." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of history. "There are people who would kill to erase every trace of my existence, to bury the truth forever." Robert's mind raced as the enormity of what she was saying sunk in. The Romanovs, the royal family of Russia, had been murdered decades ago, their legacy thought to be wiped out. But now, here she was, claiming to be their last living heir. And someone, a powerful someone, was hunting her. Before Roberts could digest this new information, a shadow loomed ahead. They were not alone. A cold voice broke the stillness, cutting through the night like a knife. "You should have stayed out of this, Roberts." He spun around, and there, in the flickering light of the courtyard, stood one of their pursuers, a mantle, cloaked in a dark overcoat, his eyes cold and calculating. He was flanked by two others, their movements stiff and deliberate, like trained hunters. They were closing in. Olga's face drained of color. "We have to move, Ano." They took off again, running through the narrow streets, their pursuers not far behind. Every turn, every alley felt like another step closer to being trapped. Roberts could feel his chest tightening, the weight of the situation sinking in. They couldn't outrun them forever. But then a thought struck him. If they could make it to the airport, to the planes leaving Paris, maybe, just maybe, they could escape. The chase led them to the train station, but they were forced to cut across to the airport to avoid being cornered. They ducked into a terminal just as the final boarding call echoed through the loudspeakers. The woman, terrified yet determined, grabbed Robert's arm. "We're almost there," she whispered. "We can get out of this. We just need to reach that plane. We can disappear." They rushed toward the gate, the final moments of their freedom hanging in the balance. But as they approached the check-in counter, Robert's heart nearly stopped. There, standing at the boarding gate, was one of the shadowy figures from the alley. He was unmistakably tall man with a stoic expression, dressed in a sleek suit. He was boarding the same plane they had planned to escape on. Roberts froze. Cliffhanger. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he locked eyes with the man. Olga's grip on his arm tightened, and for a fleeting second, Roberts considered making a break for it. But it was too late. The man had already spotted them. He gave a brief, knowing nod. "It's too late," Olga muttered under her breath. "They found us again." Robert's pulse quickened as the realization hit him. No matter where they went, no matter how far they ran, the pursuers were always one step ahead. And now, with one of them boarding the plane, Roberts knew that the stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just running from a conspiracy anymore, they were running for their lives. The door to the plane was closing, and Roberts knew that the next few moments would determine whether they would survive or fall into the hands of the enemy. The grand finale, unmasking the truth. The sprawling estate loomed ahead like a silent sentinel, its stone walls draped in ivy and shadows. Roberts, still clutching the mysterious stocking, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had been running for days, barely sleeping, always looking over his shoulder. And now, here he was standing at the gates of a grand country manor, the very last place he expected to be. As the gates swung open, Robert stepped onto the manicured grounds, his heart racing with both anticipation and dread. The letter, the cryptic instructions, the endless chassis had all led him here. But to what end? What was waiting for him inside? He had no answers, only a gnawing sense that everything was about to change. He was met at the door by Count Stepanye, a tall, imposing man with a chiseled jaw and eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The Count's presence was as intimidating as the manor itself, yet his smile was disarmingly polite, almost charming. "Ah, Mr. Roberts," he said with a deep voice that echoed slightly in the grand hallway. "I trust you've had a fascinating journey." Roberts nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He was here to deliver the stocking, nothing more. But a strange feeling had begun to settle in the pit of his stomach. Everything about this felt off. The Count's impeccable politeness, the grandiosity of the house, it all seemed too perfect, too orchestrated. And then, the door at the far end of the room opened, revealing a woman dressed in a lavish gown, her face veiled in shadow. "Ah, here she is," Count Stepanye said, gesturing toward the woman with a flourish. "The Grand Duchess Olga." Roberts couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. The woman before him, tall and elegant, had all the makings of someone royal. Her regal posture, the fine details of her attire, even the way she moved it screamed aristocracy. And yet, something didn't add up. There was a slight twitch in her eye, a nervousness she tried to mask. She extended a hand to Roberts, her fingers adorned with sparkling jewels. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, her voice smooth, but with an underlying edge of tension. Roberts hesitated only for a moment before taking her hand. Something about her felt both familiar and foreign, like a character in a play that he couldn't quite place. And then, as if by instinct, he glanced at the stocking still clutched in his other hand. "Your Highness," he began, "I was given a message to deliver this, from Mr. Pyne." The Duchess Olga smiled faintly, a mysterious glint in her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Pyne," she murmured. "The man who sees everything, who controls everything. A fascinating individual." Before Roberts could reply, there was a flicker of something in her gaze. It was subtle, but it was enough. A brief hesitation, a slight stammer, as if she were about to say something but caught herself at the last second. Robert's heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. Then, as if to confirm his suspicions, the woman spoke again. "I've been waiting for this moment. Everything is falling into place now." But just as she said that, a crack in her polished facade appeared. Her voice faltered, the regal air slipping for just a moment. "I mean, this will be quite the performance." Roberts froze, the pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place. He stared at her, confusion and realization dawning in equal measure. Performance. The word echoed in his mind. He had heard that voice before, heard that exact phrase. But it wasn't a duchess, it was Maggie Sayers, Roberts muttered under his breath, the name coming to him like a bolt of lightning. The woman, oh, the actress, smiled a wicked smile, the mask slipping away completely. "Oh, you are clever, Mr. Roberts. Too clever for your own good," she said, her voice now dripping with sarcasm. "Indeed, I am Maggie Sayers, hired by Pyne himself to play the part. The royal heir, merely a ruse, a bit of theater to keep you on your toes." The revelation hit Roberts like a punch to the gut. The woman he had believed to be the key to everything, the mysterious royal, was nothing more than an actress. And what was worse, she had been in on the entire scheme from the start. "And the stocking?" Roberts asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Just a prop," she replied nonchalantly, "to keep you busy, to keep you running, to make you believe you were part of something bigger than you really were." The room seemed to spin as Roberts tried to process this new layer of deception. The chase, the constant threats, the run in it had all been part of the game. But the true twist came when he looked at the Count. Stepanye was smiling now, his posture relaxing as the charade unraveled. "You see, Mr. Roberts," the Count said, stepping forward, "while you played hero, chasing shadows across Europe, the secret plants everything Pyne promised you were already safely transported elsewhere. All you were doing was running in circles, a convenient distraction." Roberts felt a sickening wave of betrayal wash over him. The treasure, the jewel, the conspiracy everything had been a smokescreen. He had been a pawn all along. Cliffhanger. As the room around him seemed to close in, Robert's mind raced. How had he been so blind? How had he missed the signs? The game was over, he had been outplayed. But as the Count and Maggie exchanged a knowing look, a single chilling thought struck him. Who was Pyne really working for? Before he could voice his question, the sound of a door creaking open echoed from the far end of the room. A figure stepped into the light, their face hidden in shadow. A voice, cold and familiar, spoke. "Did you really think it was over, Mr. Roberts?" The room held its breath, and Roberts knew with a sickening certainty that the game had just entered its final, most dangerous phase. Satisfying resolution, glory found. The days following the storm of deception and chaos were quieter than Roberts had ever imagined they could be. The noise of the chase, the clamor of uncertainty, and the constant rush of adrenaline had faded into a distant memory. Now, in the solitude of his small apartment, a strange sense of calm had settled over him. He had been handed an unexpected prize, but it came with a lingering taste of confusion and uneasiness he couldn't quite shake. The jewel-encrusted case, its surface gleaming in the dim light of his sitting room, sat before him on the table. The case was more intricate than anything Roberts had ever seen, its craftsmanship elegant and mesmerizing. But it wasn't the case itself that held his attention. It was the check tucked neatly inside, bearing the promise of £50, an amount that seemed absurdly small compared to everything he had been through, yet it was a symbol of something far more elusive. A reward. For a moment, Roberts let his fingers trace the fine edges of the case. It was a token of his triumph, a reminder of the role he had played in a story that had seemed to defy all logic. He had been part of something so much larger than himself, a secret mission, a hidden conspiracy, a world of danger and intrigue. And now here he was, a man who had survived it all, clutching his reward in a quiet room far from the chaos of Paris, Geneva, and the train that had started it all. He settled into his armchair by the fireside, the gentle crackling of the fire offering a strange sense of comfort. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Roberts, for the first time in what felt like forever, allowed himself to relax. He opened the novel resting on the table beside him, a book he had meant to read for years, and let the familiar, mundane words wash over him. It was a peaceful moment, an ordinary moment, in stark contrast to the whirlwind of excitement that had dominated his recent life. But as he read, his mind kept drifting back to the adventure. The faces of the people he had encountered, the secrets he had uncovered, the games that had been played at his expense, all of it seemed distant now, almost dreamlike. The winding paths of danger and deception had led him to this point, but Roberts couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story, if there were layers he had yet to uncover. He looked down at the case again, then at the check, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The life he had returned to, the life that once seemed so dreary and predictable, now felt somehow more vibrant. The humdrum days of filing papers, attending meetings, and sitting through long hours at the desk no longer held the same dullness. His quiet life had been forever altered, not by the grand treasure or the thrilling encounters, but by the memories of what he had faced. But with that new perspective came questions that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Was it all real? Had it truly happened the way it seemed, or was it a carefully constructed illusion, a performance designed to pull him into a web of intrigue for reasons unknown? Had Pyne's game been nothing more than a long con, a fabrication from the very start? And what of the people he had met, the actress posing as the Grand Duchess, the mysterious agent, the shadowy figures in the alleys? Who were they really? Were they players in a much larger scheme, or mere actors in a performance meant to keep him guessing? Roberts leaned back in his chair, staring into the flickering flames, and for a moment he couldn't help but smile. The firelight reflected in his eyes, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. After everything, the chase, the danger, the twist, she had come out victorious. But there was one thing that remained unsolved, one question that continued to linger in the back of his mind. Had it all been real? Or was it simply a dream, a carefully constructed illusion created for a man who craved excitement and glory? As the pages of his novel turned slowly in his hands, Roberts couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't truly over. Something was still unfinished, some thread left dangling in the winds of uncertainty. Perhaps, just perhaps, his greatest adventure was yet to come. Cliffhanger. The fire crackled louder, snapping Roberts from his thoughts. He glanced at the window where the faintest shadow passed by the curtains, too swift to be seen clearly. A cold chill ran down his spine as he set the book aside and stood up. The shadow lingered just outside, almost as if it was waiting for him to notice. He stared at the door, his heart pounding. What if the real game had only just begun?